He's called the Fire Brothers channel, but where's his fucking brother? Like, he always says, my brother couldn't be here today, and I'm like, is he dead? Like, is this? Am I not in on a joke? Like,
that's the joke.
Did he morph with his brother when he was little, or is he just lying about his family? Like, I don't think that's honest of him, to be fair.
It always amazes me how people often think that there's like some big, huge conspiracy as to why Squeaker couldn't be here today, when in reality it's just that he's really lazy and, you know, he's a platypus that doesn't do much all day. Like, it's pretty simple. And some people are like, Fire has him in his basement, we need to rescue him. Or sometimes it's like, there is no Squeaker, even though he has been here a couple of times. Well, I guess with 500 videos plus, it will be pretty easy to miss if he only appears in like 1% of those. Anyways guys, today we're talking about Dinobot, one of my favorite characters from Beast Wars. And more specifically, the modern day problem that we have with Dinobot. Now, when I mean problem, I don't mean like, oh, Dinobot's such a racist, guys, he needs to be stopped, that hissing, it offends people. Nah, I'm not talking about that kind of problem. From a storytelling standpoint, what's Dinobot mostly known for? He's the Maximo from Beast Wars, which defected to the Maximo side and had that very cool and very emotional character arc where he slowly grew to trust his fellow Maximals and eventually gave his life to save all of humanity and his friends. In the words of Optimus Primal, you lived a warrior and died a hero. I think Dinobot is easily one of the best Transformers characters out there, without a doubt. He's one of my personal favorites, he's easily in the top 10. The problem with Dinobot is that, besides that amazing story from like almost 25 years ago, what else is Dinobot known for? Exactly, not much. A lot of Dinobot stories often tend to like follow this same trope. Dinobot either starts as a Predacon and gradually becomes a Maximal, or he just starts off as a Maximal and, you know, fights off the Predacons. This has been repeated in comics, in small scattered pieces of information here and there, like Aspecto Prime, the IDW comics, and even the Netflix show has basically redone the arc, except, you know, less cooler. In Netflix, Dinobot is pretty much the same character, you know, with his sense of honor and stuff, but I guess a little less confrontational and aggressive than he was in Beast Wars, because in Beast Wars, as soon as Megatron proved to be an ineffectual leader, Dinobot immediately challenged him. In this one, he seems to be more tolerant, but besides that, I mean, it's pretty much the same. Even the imagery from the episode where Dinobot dies in Kingdom is straight up taken, ripped off the original Beast Wars. If you look at these side by side, they're almost the exact same thing. And even the Beast Wars comic, which I made a video of because I think it's very good, and if you haven't checked that out, I'm gonna put a link to it in the description down below and the comments down below, because honestly the comic is really good, you should check it out. And if you're curious to know more about it, I talk about it very in depth in that video. But even the comic is not really saved from the reusing of Dinobot's trope. I get that reusing a story is nothing new to Transformers. Like, you could argue that most of the franchise is the same story being told over and over and over again, with some differences, some extreme differences like animated, and some minor differences like Transformers Prime. And don't even get me started about the movies, they're all pretty much the same, with the exception of BB and arguably the first movie and somewhat Dark of the Moon. But to cut a long story short, even in the comic, Dinobot starts off as a Predacon with honor, who you know, eventually defects to the Maximals. Although I do like Dinobot's reason for defecting to the Maximals in the comic more than the show itself, it's still pretty much the same story. It's pretty ironic how the War for Cybertron trilogy marketing material did a better job reinventing Dinobot and taking his character in a different direction than all of the official shows after Beast Wars, which gave him the spotlight. If you don't know, in the marketing material you get these little cards that basically contain a picture of the golden disc, which you can like peel off, and it reveals the future of a certain character. For Dinobot, he gets some pretty interesting stuff. In one possible reality, Dinobot leads a united Maximal and Predacon faction. He stands alongside Cheeto, Rattrap, Eraser, Scorponok, and Black Arachnia. That's pretty interesting. In another one, he becomes a Maximal, and you know, that's kind of generic, it's kind of like the same story we've already seen over and over again. But the last one, he becomes a Herald of Unicron and goes with the name Dynamos, and I think that's very interesting and very, very cool. Now, I'm not saying that a character needs to be like completely reinvented like animated did for them to be interesting, but much like Chris McFeely said in his video about the basics on Dinobot, for Dinobot, since his story was so well made in the original Beast Wars show, anything that comes after is gonna really struggle to match up to that. It's like Beast Wars was the highlight of him, so anything besides that, it's gonna, probably be lesser or not as good. So the only real things that the Dinobot has been, given as a character after Beast Wars is that he's either a good guy, that's, just a straight up good guy, doesn't play much of a role, kind of like in the IDW comics. They repeat the same story, like War for Cybertron and the Beast Wars comic. Or you explore Dinobot's past, which has been briefly here and there explored. Some of the early comics and manga actually do explore his previous life as a Predacon before reaching Earth. And that's pretty interesting, but besides that, Dinobot has been kinda stale. Now granted, this isn't really Dinobot's fault, it's also the fault that Beast Wars as an era hasn't been explored all that often. Just recently, Beast Wars is getting its due. So I guess it's only kinda natural that Dinobot doesn't get to see that much action or reinvention. But it's still kind of upsetting to see one of the best characters in like Beast Wars to be relegated to just, oh, here's my story, I start as Predacon, then join Maximus, and then die heroically. Which is not a bad premise, it's just that it gets repeated way too often. Kinda like the trope of Optimus Prime always dying, if you ask me. Or Cliffjumper always dying. What can we do with Dinobot to make him more interesting? Well, like I mentioned, repeating the story arc from Beast Wars is the easy thing to do. But you can only do that so many times before it starts getting stale. I think it's already getting a little stale, especially when the copies are so blatant like with Netflix. Although the Beast Wars comic might do something interesting with Dinobot, since I think the Dinobot from the Beast Wars comic is more interesting and it's heading into a very good direction. Like, Dinobot reminds me a lot of the Terminator. Now, I know how this sounds, but think about this. Both start off as bad guys and then they become good, they reform, and they die heroically. And after that they kinda come back, but not really, in the form of Dinobot 2 and the other Arnold Schwarzenegger robot from Terminator 3. And then, ever since that, all of the other appearances from Dinobot have been a repeat of what happened in Terminator 2. All the other appearances from Arnold Schwarzenegger have been a repeat of Terminator 2 with him dying heroically, each time having less and less impact. And I see the same thing being repeated with Dinobot, which it's kind of ironic, because Dinobot's whole thing was about, trying to defy fate in, ultimately kind of embracing it and actually sacrificing himself for the greater good. Well, now he seems to be kind of a slave to fate, like it's his fate to switch factions, it's his fate to die. So how would I reinvent Dinobot? Well, an option, which I know you might be very unpopular, keep him as a bad guy. Like, I guess Kingdom kinda did that, but the problem with Kingdom is that we didn't see Dinobot be part of the bad guy crew long enough. And when he did die, it was a, almost shot for shot recreation of Call of Hero, which kind of, took me a bit out of the experience. And honestly, I don't see Kingdom Dinobot as a Predacon, even though he technically is, and even the toy classifies him as a Predacon. In fact, I don't see him as a Predacon so much that I have Dinobot pair up with my other Maximals in my display collection, not with the Predacons. The Predacons are just Megatron, Scorponok, Black Arachne, and the other fossilizers. So making Dinobot a Predacon, like maybe a hardcore Predacon who doesn't join the Maximals but, has a sense of honor, and like when he fights the Maximals he tries to fight fair and square. I think that could be more interesting than him simply just defecting. Another alternative, I guess, would be just to have Dinobot survive a show. Like, don't have him die, have him like live on to redeem himself for all the things he did as a Predacon. Basically trying to make amends. Which I guess sacrificing would be a good way to resolve that, but I don't know, like, you're starting to see the problem here. Dinobot's story arc is so good that anything that comes after it is very, very hard to, surpass or one-up. So that's why most of the time Transformers just reuses the same story arc or just explores his past. And speaking of which, I think exploring Dinobot's past, like how maybe he started out as a warrior, how he became so honorable, I think there's an interesting story there. Have him slowly develop into the Dinobot we know from Beast Wars. And that would eventually, defect the Maximals. Or even do what the War for Cybertron cards did. Make him a herald of Unicron, like he becomes like an evil version of himself and he's slowly trying to regain his sense of honor. Like his warrior spirit still lives on despite him being, basically a slave to Unicron. Which I guess was kind of the point of Dinobot 2, but that wasn't exactly very well developed in the show. Because, the whole episode where we were supposed to see that there's a bit of Dinobot in Dinobot 2 never came to being, kind of making the whole thing be a bit more a rush. If you haven't watched Beast Wars, you're a bit lost to what I'm saying, but basically, in the original show after Dinobot died, Megatron made a clone of Dinobot, calling him Dinobot 2, original name, and at the end of the show, like, Dinobot 2 started getting a sense of honor, and becoming more like the Dinobot we knew and loved, but that kinda came out of nowhere though. All of a sudden, oh, I'm Dinobot again. But originally, the plan was that there was gonna be an episode where Rat Trap was gonna try and get Dinobot back. He was gonna revive him by using Dinobot 2's body and transferring Dinobot's consciousness. And that was gonna tie into the last episode where Dinobot's consciousness starts resurging and, you know, Dinobot 2 regains the sense of honor that the original Dinobot had and saves the Maximals once again. But that never came to being, so Dinobot 2 became more like Dinobot for no reason in the last episodes. But I still think a story arc like that could work. Alternatively, and I think thematically this could work, have Dinobot reject fate. Have him be like, you know, I'm a warrior, I'm not gonna die here, I'm gonna do my best to defy fate. If it's our destiny to kill each other, I'm gonna do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. And have like Dinobot be like a third party in a Beast Wars. Have him lead a united, you know, team of Maximals and Predacons who try to defy fate, much like the Kingdom card was suggesting. I think that could be an interesting story arc. Of course, this Dinobot will probably be a bit more selfish since he will probably, you know, try to defy fate for selfish reasons. Maybe he doesn't want to die or whatever. But there's ways to work around that and there's ways to make that justifiable. Honestly, I think there's a lot of potential with Dinobot's character, not just him, you know, repeating the same story over and over again. And I don't think we're at the point yet, emphasis on the word yet, where Dinobot's story has become stale and repetitive, because I could probably list the amount of times the Beast Wars arc for Dinobot has been repeated in the palm of my hand, and that's alright for now. But if, knowing Hasbro and how they like to repeat certain tropes, like Optimus Prime dying, the Autobots and Decepticons leading Cybertron and starting their war on Earth with the humans, although credit to Netflix I guess for, you know, doing away with that. There was no humans in the show. Cliffjumper always dying. Like, I can easily see if Dinobot be the next Optimus Prime and Cliffjumper, you know, where the story either repeats or the same trope always repeats, and it's like, oh, Dinobot's here, well, time to see him die. How would you guys reinvent Dinobot's story? Now, when I mean reinvent, doesn't mean like, oh wow, let's do an animated and like, let's change the whole continuity and the series upside down. I mean like, what else would you do with his story? Like, what would you want from a Dinobot story that's not repeating the same story arc from the Beast Wars era? Or you could even repeat it and change some things to make it more interesting. The Beast Wars comic, what they're doing is that this Dinobot, the Dinobot from the Beast Wars comic, is way weaker because he took damage from the Predacons pretty early on in the story. Oh, spoilers. Oops. So now he's a much weaker character, but he's still trying to like cope with that. He's trying to be useful, he's trying to become stronger despite his injuries. He's still trying to persist. And he's questioning whether he has a place amongst the Maximals anymore now that he's like in a weakened state. Which I think it's a story arc that has a lot, and I mean a lot of potential. I mean, I still think Dinobot's probably gonna die at the end of the comic, but I mean, for now, I'm liking where this is going. As for Netflix, I'm very disappointed that it was just a complete repeat. It didn't do anything that much interesting with Dinobot. And the 2005 IDW comics kinda just treated Dinobot as a side character. The most interesting Dinobot I've seen in the comics will be the ones from like very early on. Like in the Timelines comic where Dinobot's past gets explored and we see the theft of the golden disc. Like stuff like that is very interesting to me, because we see a different side of Dinobot there. One that's like more primal and less, you know, influenced by his fellow Maximals like we see in Beast Wars. But hey, that's just my opinion. I wholeheartedly agree with Chris McFeely when he says that, you know, Dinobot's story was so good that it's very hard to, you know, do anything new with it. But I still think it can be done. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's impossible. But yeah, like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Stay safe, guys.
He lived a warrior and died a hero. Let his spark join the Matrix, the greatest of Cybertron.
Anyways guys, before we go, shout out to our amazing patrons: TrueBlue712, Stitch Productions, Stephanie Baller, Christopher Prime, Predaking Hunter Plays, Mario Gordon, Allspark Studios, Scrub Lordo, Epic Nin, and special thanks to our big bold patrons, Jordan the Great and X23 who donated a amount of money. I'll leave you guys to wonder how much they did. Thank you guys for your support, it's much appreciated. It helps me keep the channel running and feed Squeaker, and if you guys want to donate to our Patreon, link to it is going to be in the description down below and in the comments down below, along with the channels of my patrons so you guys can go and check them out. I collab with some of them sometimes. Scrub Lord. And if you guys want me to shout you out, put a link to your channel, suggest your own videos, or collab with me in some of my videos or your videos, vice versa, doesn't matter. The link to our Patreon is going to be in the description down below and in the comments down below for you guys to check out if you're interested. But keep in mind that this is entirely optional. So yeah, thank you to my patrons for donating, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Stay safe, guys.